Hi, I'm Delisi.
And I'm Chef James Rigato.
And in this episode of Essential Cooking, we go back 100 years to the start of Prohibition, the rise of Italian food in America, and how cocktails changed during that time in our history. So Prohibition in the United States was a nationwide constitutional ban on the production, importation, transportation, and sale of alcoholic beverages from 1920 to 1933. So it's like 100 years ago is when all this started happening.
Yeah, for 13 years, too. That's what's so crazy is how long Prohibition lasted. It wasn't. It's like, you think of it as this like flash in the pan. It's 13 years.
Yep. And it decimated restaurants, and it did a lot of damage at the time.
And for me, I'm a big cider buff, and what people don't realize is why Americans, why our cider can't really compete with France and Spain and England is because we tore out all of our trees. So we used to have tons of cider varietals, hundreds of varietals around the country, and they were torn out, like uprooted, and it decimated, farmers, and that's why we switched to all that sweet culinary fruit. So when you go to the apple orchard now, it's Northern Spy maybe is the most savory, but it's, Macintosh and Red Delicious and John of Gold. Right. Now, Honey Crisp.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, we used to have really great, incredible, diverse apples, and we're getting it back. But that's kind of why cider's trying to come back, is because Prohibition, we're still 100 years ago, we're still recovering from it. And
there are still places in the country where it is enforced.
Yeah.
There are still counties in the United States where, there's dry counties.
Oh.
So this 18th Amendment, so here's the interesting thing about the 18th Amendment. It only forbade the manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquors, but not their consumption. And this was a bit of the loophole.
Yeah.
I mean, some people started hoarding it. I mean, they built these giant wine cellars in their basement and just had all the wine they thought they would need for however long this thing was going to last.
Yeah.
So here are the exceptions, and this is kind of funny. So sacramental wine was still permitted for religious purposes, and so all of a sudden, a questionable number of rabbis and priests soon, started to pop up everywhere. So there's suddenly there's more priests than ever, and there's more rabbis than ever. Drugstores were allowed to sell medicinal whiskey to treat everything from a toothache to the flu. So a physician could give you a prescription every 10 days for a pint of hard liquor for your toothache.
I know. I wish they could still do that, right?
The doctor's notes would say take 3 ounces every hour for stimulant or till stimulated. So that's kind of how this was. Everybody was joking about this. But this is when the speakeasies started to pop up as well. And that was significant because there were so many of them. And this is where people were consuming alcohol, and actually it was being made illegally. So now we're getting, illegally made alcohol, and then people were consuming it there. Even Walgreens started to do the pharmaceutical part. They went from 20 locations to 500 during the 1920s because they wanted to make money, and that's how you made money. But the speakeasies and Italian food, I think, is fascinating.
Yeah, that's where you could argue that Italian food was introduced to Americans, because the Italians were opening speakeasies by the thousands. And even though it wasn't necessarily real Italian food, it was kind of the protein-heavy American approach, but it was still made by the Italian immigrants. So mom would be making pasta and getting the food ready, and then obviously dad would be out making wine or other kinds of moonshine. And it wasn't really the true Italian food, but they still were making money and pouring out liquor.
And so even after Prohibition, this sort of laid the groundwork for Americans' appreciation of Italian food. And the rest is history. Now I don't even know how many Italian restaurants there are in the United States. And
that style is still around too. That red sauce is kind of where that came from.
Right. And so it was different, but it was made for the American palate, I guess, back then.
But now it's kind of its own category, because I do love classic Italian, real
right.
True. But I still crave, proper red sauce too.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so
Black perspectives haven't always been centered in the telling of America's story. Now, we're taking center stage. Introducing NPR's Black Stories, Black Truths, a collection of Black-led stories from NPR's podcasts. Search NPR Black Stories, Black Truths wherever you get your podcasts.
Now we're going to get to something called bathtub gin. And this was scary because there was no regulation on it, and thousands of people died from consuming bathtub gin.
It's incredibly dangerous. I mean, you still, obviously that's what moonshine. If you go down to, Kentucky, Bourbon County, you can find some bootleg moonshine for sure.
Have you ever had any?
I have, but I'm not going to tell you where.
And Was
It's
it
intense.
awful?
It's intense. I mean, it's not to be taken lightly. But I mean, there's people that still, it's at this point, it's cultural. You're talking about 100 years. There's a few generations of people that made their own shine, and it's a part of culture. But yeah, I mean, that's incredibly dangerous. You got to know what you're doing.
All right, so it had all these different kinds of effects on it. New York City, in terms of the speakeasies, there were more than 30,000 of them. And here's something about the Motor City. Detroit's alcohol trade was second only to the auto industry in its contribution to the economy, which is
That's crazy. I
pretty
mean, that's
crazy.
You know, our history with Prohibition too. I mean, obviously, with you look at bars like Cliff Bell's, or the DAC kind of was famous for the Last Word cocktail, which is one of my favorites. My girlfriend Sam's favorite drink ever, which is based on green chartreuse. And that's kind of our gift to the beverage world, because you can still find a Last Word in cocktail bars across the country, and it's from Detroit. They say about 1918 is the guess of when it came out.
Right.
And then even Grey Ghost is named after an old rum runner. The Grey Ghost of the Detroit River. So the Prohibition culture in Detroit is alive and well.
So, eventually Prohibition was lifted pretty much everywhere. And some states, as we mentioned, they still kept it enforced. And even today, which I think is kind of crazy, I think there's about 10 states that have counties where alcohol sales are prohibited.
That's interesting.
That's interesting. Did you ever try to make your own alcohol?
No, no, not really. I mean, obviously I have friends that do, cider and beer are pretty common, the home brewing, but it's a lot less dangerous. I mean, distilling, just the methane, and there's all sorts of, there's a lot of gases that are produced. And when I travel, like down in Mezcal country, down in Mexico, in Oaxaca, there's a lot of those mezcals that aren't allowed to be imported because they just do it kind of all by old school, by touch, taste, and feel. And if you're not careful, I mean, yeah, you can get in trouble. You can get sick. I think there's a little bit less dying, nowadays than there was then, because there's probably less illegal alcohol. But yeah, you got to be careful when you're, especially when you're traveling to other countries. I mean, there's in the Caribbean, there's people getting sick and getting and dying if you drink tainted alcohol. It can be very dangerous. Obviously, we're not doing it like we did in Prohibition, but it's still out there.
It's still out
there.
Be
careful.
Be careful.
Don't be drinking that bathtub gin. Take it easy.
Well, there was another drink that was created during Prohibition, because the goal is the bathtub gin was so difficult to take that there's a lot of sweeteners put into drinks, right?
Sweetening, lengthening, kind of diluting. Those are the real measures people would take to make liquor palatable. And that's really where cocktail culture comes from. That's why a lot of your, cocktail bars are kind of Prohibition vibe, because a lot of the drinks, like the Last Word and like the one we're about to talk about, the Bee's Knees, they came out in this era of having to make this horrible, liquid palatable. And so you'd add sweeteners or tonics or lengtheners. And a lengthener means you basically would add a beverage to make it less strong.
Right.
So the Bee's Knees is a classic.
The Bee's Knees came out during Prohibition, and it used honey. So it was honey and lemon juice and gin, basically.
Yeah.
And so do people come into your restaurant and ever ask for it? Is it like this, or is it this defunct kind of drink?
No, not at all. I mean, the idea, there's arguments that there's only a handful of recipes out there, period. And then the ingredients just get interchanged, right? I mean, there's only a handful of cocktails, and then it's just, you change out the ingredients. So this is a classic. I mean, you basically have acid, and then you have sweet, and then your syrup. So honey is lengthened by adding water, basically. So it's a syrup. It's a honey syrup. And then a lemon twist in the gin. So, I mean, it's really, it's a 3-part cocktail. It's super simple, bright, fresh, and easy. So, I mean, that can be made in 100 different ways. But I would say bartenders mostly will have a spin on it. So maybe they make a different style. Maybe they use whiskey, or they do something different, or an aquavit cocktail. So it's a little bit, less ABV. But no, I don't really think people come out asking for Bee's Knees, but
they are now.
But it also comes up in conversation because a bartender might say, "Oh, this is our spin on it," or if for a restaurant like Mabel, which we have our own honey on the roof, when we start harvesting that, now it makes sense. Here's a Bee's Knees using our own honey. It's more of a conversation piece.
The Bee's Knees might be making a comeback with honeybees in the spotlight these days.
We would like to thank La Marca Prosecco for their support. From the hills of Veneto, Italy, you can never go wrong with Prosecco, whether it's in a spritz or drinking straight.
We'd also like to thank you for listening. Joan Isabella is our executive producer. Associate producers are Lisa Brancato and David Lyons. Production provided by Studios on the Pond and Rowan Nemisto. Original music by the Mallet Brothers. This is a production of Detroit Public Radio Station, WDET.
Subscribe on your favorite podcast app and join us as we explore the world of food and how to cook it right here on Essential Cooking.